Okay, this is it. Are you ready? Have you put the cat out, put the kids to sleep? This is where we finally do the actual magic, usually around the 7th one of my little lessons here. This is where we do the final magic of this whole thing. So, what do we want to do? What we want, first we want to know where we are. So, there's probably global variables floating around here somewhere, but I want one that just has one thing, and that's our position. That's all I care about. I'm going to make that purple. Purple things are special. Now, this point actually grabs it in shader space. It doesn't grab it in what we want, which is world space. So we actually are going to have to do one of these guys. This is a transform. And we're going to go from space current to space world, which I think we can just pick here. Yeah, space world. Okay, so this actually has our world space point. So what we want to know now is how close is that to one of our magic points, one of our actual magic stuff. This is, in other words, instead of a map, we're using these wet points, this point cloud. So funny, I call it a point cloud because we just happen to have a way to look at point clouds inside of shaders. And they're called, you have to type them, right? But point cloud something or other. You see all this point cloud stuff? Lots of cool stuff. All we care about right now, point cloud open. So what we're going to do is we're going to put, that's where we're going to look. You're wondering, what's our file going to be? Well, I'm going to kick that can down the road and say we're going to make that a parameter. Our next question is going to be, what's our radius? What's our max points? Da, 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 da. Let's go ahead and make those parameters as well. Final question is, somebody's texting me, saying amazing, wonderful. Question is, what are we going to look at? In other words, what is our channel going to be? And in that case, that's actually what we grab outwards. You might think this end channel is it. Not true. Basically, there's another, how to explain this? Well, this point cloud thing basically grabs a bunch of points around the point, the shader point, looking at those. What you look at, which attribute you grab of that, we have another point cloud thing for, which is called point cloud filter. In other words, the idea being point cloud filter, the idea being that it grabs, this guy is going to look at a number of points, like by default 10 and a search radius of that. We're going to change those, don't worry. Of those 10 guys, it's going to filter and give us something out of those, basically our average. And what channel do we want of it? This is where we say the magic. We say wetness, right? Or we would, but actually I'm going to bump that up to a parameter too. It's actually, that's going to be a float. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and claim right now that that is actually the wetness at this point if we've given everything in proper sequence. So that would actually become the wetness at this point, which we said would then mix with our colors. So there's a lot of open things here, but the main thing to take away is we grab a point, we make them in world space. We use a PC open to look at a point cloud, look at a point cloud open to find the point cloud. What are we grabbing from? We kicked all the can down the road right now. Then after that, whatever it gets from there, don't worry about what this handle is. It's basically going to grab out of as many points as it looks what it finds as the average closest one. And the channel that we're going to grab is going to be called wetness. That gives us our wetness at this shader point. Okay? So now let's go back to where our can kicking happened. Here's our grid's wet shader. Don't worry about these guys. We'll use those for liquid later. Here's our wet shader. Let's make it blue because that's special. Okay. It's got a bunch of parameters that we kick down the can on the road. Let's put them up into our wet, all these guys. Let's just go ahead and bling, blang, bloom. Put them into our folder. Okay, so we want the point cloud texture, the search radius, the number of points. This I'm actually going to leave there. Sometimes you might grab more, but we really need a couple points around there. 10 is plenty. It might go a little faster if you use fewer. I don't know. But let's go ahead and go back to our guy here. Remember our grid parameters? Whoa. Grid parameters. This guy, our particle separation, the space in between our particles, right? We've said before that that's kind of the distance that we tend to look for things. Now, the distance, we could actually make another thing called shader distance and have it be a version of that. Let's go ahead and do that. I was going to make it simple for you, but nah, let's make it so it's special. I feel like I'm cheating you otherwise. So let's actually have something called shader dist. I think if you were making this for a bunch of other people to use on a bunch of shots, this might confuse them a little bit because they might go, "What's that?" Because that's different. In reality, we're gonna make it here, and we're just going to make it a relative reference. So then we're going to copy this and have that be our shader distance we use inside of the shader. In other words, the search radius that it uses here is going to be that what we're calling shader distance. Why did I make those separate guys when I kind of waffled on it? Because particle separation is really the fineness, the granularity of the thing. You might want to have a different shader distance, or you want to, at least if you're making this for other, say you're making this to do your own shots, but you're also going to give it to another team that's doing other shots of wet stuff or whatever. They might, in other cases, want to have a bigger or larger shader distance. So I like to give them the option, and then by default link it back to there so they know that, oh, you normally want to keep it on this same number, but we have the choice to change it later. If they don't know what it is, we can leave it alone. Just like we found out the distance threshold and blend width tend to work out well if they're half of those. Shader distance tends to work out well if it's the same guy. Okay, so what about our other guys? They aren't going to be parameters. Remember we talked about the point cloud. Who's our point cloud guy? Well, if you remember, when we baked them out, we baked it all the way down into here, this big thing, whatever it comes out to be, blah, 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 blah. So I'm actually going to copy that and go all the way back to the shader. And this is a little odd. I don't normally do this. All the way back to the shader and just paste a reference to that. So it's going to, go to that certain file. So each frame, it's going to be a different file from that. The other thing is wetness. We might actually make that a channel as well. I think it'll be a parameter. I'm just going to call it wetness because we called it everywhere, and that's probably what's going to be called. So now we actually have all the little bits and pieces in place. Where it's got near those points, it should be blue, and where it's away from those points, it should be the other. And the other benefit of it, because we're doing this bias, because we're mixing between the original one and that, as this wetness goes from 1 down to 0, it'll go from blue down to whatever our base color is that it's picked, which is white basically. So now this is a lot, right? So this is going to be exciting. This is actually going to work. I'm scared. Here we go. Here's our guy, right? We are expecting and hoping that our grid is going to have some kind of magic thing that looks like that. I'm going to let it go for a little while. So we're going to want to see white here, blue where it's got, the most wetness, which ironically I made red, and then going down to about whatever it is there. So let's go ahead, turn the grid on, turn the points off, cross our fingers, and see what happens if we actually render it. If it doesn't, I'm going to just feel silly. Whew, thank goodness. Interesting. So we've got something that actually goes out and does that. What I do find interesting, well, I'll get to that in a second. So first, fun. Let's turn this on. Let's also back up a little bit. And let's just take a look at render of the whole thing for a second. I'm going to point something out. You notice that it's a little larger than what you might actually want. Like our liquid, because our search radius does that. This might be a case where maybe we actually do want the search radius to be a little smaller and see what that does so it doesn't go so far away from it. Let's go ahead and give that a try. I shudder to do this live, but because this is actually live, any changes you make, this will update. But let's go ahead and be risky and put that down to half the particle separation and see what happens. And it doesn't crash. How about that? So as you can see, there's our liquid water. There it is, leaving behind our trail. And this water, by the way, that's there, looks, it's not leaving a trail, it's actually goes up in the air. As you can see from here. See, that's actually floating stuff. So there's the big magic part. Pretty cool, right? A lot of other, you can basically stop watching now and use that for all sorts of cool stuff. The only thing I haven't shown is how to do the sub-stepping and then also how to do it if this isn't a static object. In other words, if this guy is changing, we need to do a little more magic to make our our points move with it. For instance, the torus is actually moving around and bopping around. You can't just put static points, let it sit there. And if it's our zombie, he's going to be moving around and changing. So we need to do some other things. We're going to come back for that in step 8. We've already done, this is basically the basics. Everything else I'm going to do is kind of the finishing touches on it. So that's the exciting stuff I wanted to get for it. This whole wet points and using that as a thing and finally making something like this is basically the magic sauce of this whole concept. And again, the reason it's got an advantage sometimes over wet maps is, 1, it's kind of quicker. 2, you don't have to make a separate set of files. And 3, you can actually see them interactively in 3D. 4, there's some other tricks we could do. We could also move those points off the surface a little bit if we wanted to make it dry out later on. We could also make those points move with the surface, or locked with the surface in another scene, in another shot, and completely different. So there's a lot of kind of neat advantages this can have. The downsides are, as you can see, we may need to have the extra sub-stepping there. It also might have some irregularities in the edges. Might have to raise the resolution of the points. Sometimes that might get onerous. So it might not always be the world's perfect thing, but it definitely has the advantage of it'll be higher resolution than mostly what you would use for a res of the thing, and it won't stretch based on the surface. Textures stretch as the object stretch. In our case, as the object is larger, there's more points there because they're scattering points. So it's kind of cool. It's a neat thing. Like I said, I should patent it. Okay, sorry, it went over time a little bit. We're going to come back for lesson 8 and start doing the finishing touches. First, I'll make a little renderer for us, and then we'll cruise on to that torus and the zombie in the end.